Welcome to the Mongabay newscast. It's December 23rd, 2020, and I'm your host, Mike Gurecki, bringing you the news and inspiration from nature's front line. Today we have two stories about the impacts of mining and some of the new and innovative ways conservationists are dealing with those impacts. Our first guest is Manuela Callari, a Mongabay contributor who recently wrote about the tens of thousands of abandoned and shuttered mine sites in Australia. Callari tells us about her reporting on the novel solutions to restoring the native habitat destroyed by old mines and the ways the mining industry is just now starting to work with local and Aboriginal communities on their mine closure plans. We also welcome to the program Bjorn Bergman, an analyst with the NGO SkyTruth, who's leading the development of Project Inambari, an open mapping platform that utilizes satellite radar imagery to detect the impacts of small-scale illegal mining in the Amazon rainforest. Project Inambari was recently named one of the winners of the Artisanal Mining Challenge. Bergman is here to tell us how the prize money will be used to scale Project Inambari up and why satellite radar is an effective means of tracking mining in tropical forests. Here with our first story today is Manuela Callari, who has a PhD in medical science and is a doctor, but she's also a freelance science and medical writer who recently wrote about the impacts of Australia's decades-long mining boom for Mongabay. In particular, Callari looked at some of the solutions that are starting to emerge for dealing with not just the environmental impacts of that mining boom, but also the socio-economic impacts. Mining has been particularly important to the development of Australia's economy over the past several decades, and continues to play an important role. But the flip side of mining's legacy is that there are now thousands of mine sites scattered across the country that are no longer in operation and must be restored. This has led to some thorny questions about who's responsible for cleaning up the sites and addressing all of their impacts on the surrounding environment and the communities that live near the mines, which are often Aboriginal communities that have been allowed to have very little input on how mining is done on their traditional lands or how the companies that own the mine go about restoring the site once the mine is shuttered. Here's Manuela Callari to tell us more.
The mining industry has had a crucial social, political and economical role in Australia since pretty much the arrival of the settlers. So when, after the first fleet arrived in 1788, within a decade, coal was discovered in New South Wales. And then in the 1850s, gold was found in New South Wales and in Victoria. And that led to an influx of wealth and attracted many people from all over the world. It changed the Australian population dramatically. So if before the discovery of gold, the population in Australia was around 400,000, within a decade, there were 1 million people. So you can imagine that there was a substantial development of the industry and infrastructure around mining activities and, of course, around the two big cities, Melbourne and Sydney. But that, of course, came with a profound impact on the environment and, of course, on the Indigenous population. So the mining industry kept growing throughout the decades, and it still has today an important economical and political role. It has pumped Australian economy and Australian wealth. But I guess today there are a lot of other issues involved.
There's increased attention to old mine sites today. Is that because the growth of the mining industry is slowing down in Australia?
I think it's more than slowing down. I think the issue is that a lot of mine sites are abandoned as they run out, basically. And maybe there is a slowdown, but the current government is very keen to keep this industry going. And, especially after this year, when the coronavirus pandemic has hit Australian economy quite harshly, the government is very keen to boost the industry and is actually doing that for the sake of post-COVID economic recovery. So lately, in the past few months, we've actually seen a lot of interest from the government to boost the industry.
So more so than a slowdown in the industry overall, it's just that there's a lot of mines reaching the end of their useful life and they're just being abandoned?
Australia has something like 60,000 abandoned mines. And some of these are, small sites that, can date back to the gold rushes in the 1800s, but some are more recent. But the problem with post-mining rehabilitation is that although today there are regulation and laws in place, you can imagine that even only a decade ago, this regulation weren't very strict. And so today we're dealing with the legacy of these old mines abandoned throughout history that need to be rehabilitated, but I guess there's a lack of clarity on whose responsibility it is to rehabilitate these sites.
Is there a good estimate for how big the disturbance footprint is from all of these mines?
There are some numbers available, but the data is quite patchy and incomplete. 2019 report states that the disturbance footprint from mining in Western Australia alone is over 100,000 hectares.
That's nearly 250,000 acres.
And only about 40,000 hectares of those are under rehabilitation. And that's one state only. It is estimated that throughout history, across Australia, over 10 million hectares of land have been affected by the mining activity. So we're talking about huge numbers.
The law now requires companies to restore their old mine sites. How often does that actually occur?
By law, the companies, the private companies, have the responsibility to restore the mine sites. But as I said, these regulations are quite new. So mines that have started operating decades ago may not have to comply to any of the regulations that we have today, there's no agreement that was done when the mine opened. So today what happens is that before a mine site can open and start operating, the company needs to have a closure and rehabilitation plan that needs to be approved by the Environmental Protection Authority of that state. And most governments also require a bond that could cover the cost of rehabilitation in case the mining company fails to comply with the closure plan. But again, the issue is that many of these mines have been abandoned decades ago. Some have started operating decades ago when these regulations were not in place. So there is a lack of clarity of whose responsibility is it when there's no agreement. There is no formal agreement. I guess another issue is that the problem with rehabilitation is that the impact of mining is not limited within the mine sites borders, right? So the environmental impact goes beyond the mine sites. You can imagine, for example, if you have a water stream that goes through the mine sites and then, it keeps going somewhere else and the water is polluted, then there is an environmental issue beyond the borders of the mine sites. So whose responsibility is it to deal with the effect of that mining activity outside the sites?
In addition to water pollution, what are some of the other major environmental problems that need to be dealt with because of these abandoned mines?
Well, land degradation for sure, loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat for native species. There has been a huge amount of deforestation because of mining. One of the biggest issues is poor quality of the soil. And so the difficulty in regenerating the vegetation, but also deforestation and loss of habitat, and as a consequence, loss of wildlife and risk of extinction for a lot of the wildlife.
So you write in your piece for Mongabay about new efforts to restore topsoil. Can you tell us about that?
One of the biggest challenges in post-mining rehabilitation is the restoration of the topsoil. So that is the first 20 centimeter of soil profile. And that is really important because it holds nutrients, seeds, and microorganisms. So ideally what you want to do is remove the topsoils before starting operations. And then put this soil back on top of the mine sites when the mine is closed. There are two problems with that. First of all, that doesn't always happen. And second, stockpiling this topsoil for years, sometimes for the decades, it First, there's a loss of topsoil because it just gets washed away. The soil degrades, there's erosion, and there's a reduction of the properties of the soil itself. So when the mine closes and you put this soil back, it does not necessarily have all those properties that will allow the native vegetation to grow back. So Dr. Munoz Rojas from the University of Western Australia has isolated cyanobacteria from indigenous to the Pilbara region in Western Australia. The Pilbara region is one of the most heavily mined regions in Australia. And she's isolated cyanobacteria from the soil and mixed them with reconstructed soil. This consists of topsoil, waste material from the mine, and some natural soil from an undisturbed area, but still local. And she noticed that the presence of this indigenous native cyanobacteria reestablishes soil structure and promotes the retention of nitrogen and carbon, and so it makes the soil fertile again. Another thing that she noticed was that there is an association between the indigenous cyanobacteria and native indigenous plants. So if she treats the seeds with the cyanobacteria before sowing, she noticed that promotes the health and the growth of some native species. And this is really important because the reason why it's important to regenerate the indigenous vegetation is because this will attract the native wildlife back in that region. While if we've left, any foreign invasive species to grow, that native wildlife might not be able to come back in that region.
I see. So restoring the topsoil could actually also address the loss of biodiversity in that area.
Yes, rehabilitating the topsoil, and so promoting the growth of that indigenous vegetation will attract all the wildlife that once was in that region. And so you restore the biodiversity in the region and repopulate the region with wildlife.
And I suppose another benefit of restoring the topsoil would be that local communities would be able to use the land for agriculture, for instance, so there's benefits to them as well. You actually cite a study in your article that was done by University of Queensland researchers that found there's been a shift in priorities in the rehabilitation of mined land in Australia over the past 40 years, from a focus on issues like restoring soil and vegetation within the mine site to addressing the socioeconomic impacts on local and indigenous communities.
Yes, there is definitely an increasing attention to what the local communities want when rehabilitating a mine site. So sometimes there is, but yet sometimes there is a gap between, I guess, the business interests around the rehabilitation of a certain site and what the local community or the Aboriginal communities want. There is also a gap between Western science and Indigenous knowledge. So sometimes what the Aboriginal communities desire or want or think it's best for the specific site kind of clashes with what the Western science, what the environmental scientists think is right for that area. So there is definitely an improvement in terms of communicating the rehabilitation process with the Aboriginal people, with the Aboriginal communities, but there are still a lot of gaps to be filled.
Are there any examples you can tell us about to help illustrate these issues for our listeners?
An example of a successful community engagement project is a coal mine that is located along the Great Ocean Road. So Alcoa, the company that operated this mine for about 46 years, has partnered with the Eden Project, that is a UK-based educational and environmental charity, and they've transformed the massive void left from the mine into an entertainment and educational site. The rehabilitation process involved almost 4,000 people from the community. So this could be considered a successful rehabilitation project, but this mine site is in a major tourism hotspot. So having an entertainment site in a place where many tourists may go can be a smart move. But many of the mining sites are in very remote areas of Australia where having an entertainment park is just not practical. And the outback and the desert of Australia is often inhabited by Aboriginal people, and they may simply not want an entertainment park. They may simply want that the place would return to its original state as much as possible. The Aboriginal culture is particularly attached to the land, to nature, to the environment. And so often the desire of this community is just that the land goes back to what it was before the mining operation started. Sometimes that cannot happen because the damage is so profound that it may be not possible to return the land exactly how it was. There is an incredible loss of biodiversity. It may take decades to restore the biodiversity of the place, the water quality, restore the habitat for the wildlife. It may take decades, and it may not even happen. And again, we go back to, well, whose responsibility is that? Because, will the mining company be responsible for that place for the next few decades and make sure that, in 50 years, even 100 years, the place is restored? It is just very complex to come to an agreement on who's going to do that. And when that is not even possible, again, whose responsibility is it?
Mining companies in Australia aren't required to consult local or Aboriginal communities in restoring mine sites, right?
No. So the process of rehabilitation happens internally to the company, and companies aren't required to involve the Aboriginal communities in the process. In the Northern Territory, the Aboriginal communities have the so-called Aboriginal Land Rights Act that kind of protects the Aboriginal community a little more. They give them quite strong rights. But in the rest of the country, there is not such protection. So, the process happens internally. The Aboriginal people are not necessarily involved into the process. And so, again, we go back to the issue of that clash between what the company wants or what is economically feasible for them and what the Aboriginal community would want for that land.
Another source you spoke with for your piece, Marit Kracht, who is a professor at the University of Western Australia, said that engaging communities in mine closure plans would require a complete change of mindset and that the industry is moving that way, though it's not there yet.
Well, what she said was that, for a post-mining rehabilitation process to be actually successful and in line with what the local and Aboriginal community want, that there has to be this co-designing of the mining closure plan. So what she hopes for is that the process is not done internally, but it's co-designed with the local communities, with the Aboriginal communities. Because again, if we consider the Aboriginal knowledge, the Aboriginal science, we will have a much better result.
So are there any companies that are actually co-designing their mine closure plans with Indigenous or local communities at this point?
So what Kracht and Holcomb said...
That's Sarah Holcomb, a social anthropologist and senior research fellow at the University of Queensland, who Callari also consulted for her piece.
Is that there is a movement towards improving this process, improving the practices in post-mining rehabilitation, but there are still a lot of gaps that needs to be filled, and there is still a lot of challenges in communicating, consulting the Aboriginal community. Consulting the Aboriginal community comes with its own challenges because, again, there is a difference, a cultural difference and a cultural gap and a language gap sometimes. English is not always Aboriginal people's first language. Aboriginal people are used to communicate through stories, It is a very different culture than the Western culture and the Western science. And so when I remember Holcomb saying that when the environmental scientists come in and start talking, communicating what the plan is to the Aboriginal community, using all the science jargons, there is just not communication happening between the two parts. And so in the Northern Territory, for example, the Aboriginal community is very well equipped with anthropologists that help bridge that cultural gap, and they using visual media and storyboards and interpreters that can help the Aboriginal community actually understand what the process involves. But that doesn't really happen in the rest of Australia. So the industry is moving towards a rehabilitation process that is more inclusive. But as the expert I interviewed for my piece highlighted, there are still margins to improve.
So overall, what would you say is the trend line here? Are these abandoned mines being addressed properly, or is there still a long way to go?
I think things are getting better, because if we compare today's situation with, even a decade or a few decades ago, when there were no regulations and the rehabilitation was maybe not even considered. So there is an improvement, because now we have some regulation in place that can still be improved very much. But we do have some regulation in place today. I guess the problem we have now is that all that has happened throughout history now needs to be dealt with. And again, the issue goes back to who's going to deal with that. But at least today we do have some regulation. I think there needs to be a much stronger effort in Aboriginal rights protection, because if in the Northern Territory the Aboriginal communities are doing quite well, because the Aboriginal Land Rights Act do give them quite a few rights. For example, they have veto rights over allowing a mining company to operate on their land. That does not happen in the rest of Australia. So in the rest of the country, the Aboriginal communities have very little rights on deciding what happens onto their land.
All right, here to tell us about our second story of new frontiers in mine cleanup is Bjorn Bergman, the analyst with the NGO SkyTruth, who is behind Project Inambari, an innovative new use of satellite radar imagery to monitor the Amazon for the impacts of artisanal mining. As Bergman tells us, the idea for Project Inambari first occurred to him after he took a trip to southeastern Peru and saw the impacts of these mining activities firsthand.
I guess my first interest in trying to track the mining activity did come with this trip a few years ago, going out to Puerto Maldonado.
Puerto Maldonado is a city in southeastern Peru located in an area of Amazon rainforest that is heavily mined.
I was able to get in contact with some other people working in the area. One group is Cincia, which we've since partnered with. This is Center for Scientific Innovation from Wake Forest University. But it's something that you see up close if you do take like a trip on the river near Puerto Maldonado. You can see the dramatic changes to the landscape. Small scale miners have been, I guess, essentially they're maybe using a suction pump to pull up the river mud and sediment and topsoil and process out a very small concentration of gold. And what's left behind is just, landscape completely stripped of all vegetation and just these piles of rocks that you see on the riverbank. So it's pretty dramatic to see this transformation of the landscape. I saw this when I went out to some of the mining areas near Labyrinto, which is a town outside of Puerto Maldonado. But then, this is also something that you can see really obviously with satellite imagery, like Google Earth. You can see this huge area of forest that has been destroyed, and you're just seeing these barren landscape with little wastewater ponds left. So that was my first experience going out to see some of the mining firsthand. And then something I've been thinking about for the past few years. And then only recently have we tried to set up a model for detecting this activity.
And SkyTruth was already doing a lot of work with satellite imagery, right? You have a couple of marine applications.
Yeah, definitely. So SkyTruth is an environmental nonprofit that's working to apply satellite data to different environmental issues. And over the past 6 years, I've mostly been working with marine applications. So we've been using satellite radar for monitoring oil slicks. So some of these are from oil spills, others from bilge dumping out at sea when ships are just illegally dumping out some oily wastewater from their hold. We can see that is sort of a long black line behind the ship. Also tracking offshore infrastructure with satellite radar. So we'd been doing this, and then early this year I saw a video that was demonstrating using this same satellite data source. This is Sentinel-1 radar from the European Space Agency, and how they were setting up a landscape classification model. And I shared this with my colleague at SkyTruth, Christian Thomas. Christian has done a lot of really interesting work, like tracking the yearly expansion of mountaintop removal coal mining in Appalachia. Then following the methods, he was able to produce a model that did a pretty good job of predicting where mining was happening in the Amazon. We just been experimenting with this model, and then we found out about the Artisanal Mining Challenge and decided to enter a prototype map platform in that.
And that, of course, became Project Inambari, which is named after a river in Peru in a region heavily impacted by gold mining.
Yeah, so it's really been the case that this area has opened up over the past few decades, and a lot of impoverished people have gone from Peru's southern highlands down into the Amazon looking for work, and a lot of that work is with mining and logging in new areas that have opened up. Part of this is due to the interoceanic highway that now connects Brazil through to Peru's Pacific coast. So an area like the Enambari River in the district named after that was once really extremely remote, and there were few roads going through it. But since there's been more access, there just has been a tremendous expansion of unregulated mining in that area, and a lot of really serious environmental and social problems associated with it. Peru has tried to regulate it more closely, even with Operation Mercury, a military intervention in the area. But it's a real challenge just because of the, I would say that, government resources are limited, but it's also difficult to kind of maintain the political will to limit mining in an area where it's, maybe the principal economic activity. So that's a real challenge. And of course, there are a lot of people that are relying on this for employment, and there's not necessarily a lot of other alternatives. But still, it's an activity that really can have catastrophic consequences for nearby communities. That whether it's eating fish that have been contaminated by mercury, or making it not possible to pursue other types of economic activity like agriculture or ecotourism. So I am hoping that the intervention from the Peruvian government will continue to be as strong and maintain the impact that it's had in the area. And we hope that developing our platform can support that.
So tell us a little bit about why satellite radar-based detection is a good solution for monitoring for this kind of small-scale mining in tropical forests.
Yeah, so we're just getting into the rainy season in the Amazon, which means that a lot of the optical imagery that is used in some other monitoring systems is not going to work well for detecting new areas that are being cleared. So it is useful to have radar imagery for that reason. This is also a source that's free and open to the public through the European Space Agency. We're using Sentinel-1 satellite radar, and it's also something that we think is going to be increasingly accessible because a number of other companies are also launching satellite radar satellites. So we hope that, in the future, it'll be possible to get additional sources of imagery to bring in.
So when you say the radar is better than optical imagery, it's because the radar can penetrate cloud cover.
Yeah, exactly. So it's able to, because it's an active sensor, it's able to detect through cloud cover.
And the idea is to have the results of your analysis of this satellite radar data published on a publicly available map?
Yeah, that's definitely what we're planning. For me, a lot of the inspiration is coming from Global Fishing Watch. This is a public map that SkyTruth was one of the founders, and it's now gone on to become an independent organization. But I think it did a really good job of bringing public scrutiny to, extraction of a public resource. And I think that there's an opportunity to do the same thing here, to show, exactly where new mining is occurring. And, I think the public and, ideally some of the communities affected are going to have a lot of interest in it.
And you would provide email alerts to these local communities when mining is detected in their area. Would those alerts be in real time?
Yeah, so the idea is that, on the map interface, users would be able to select a polygon of interest. And then, when new mining activity comes up, they'd be notified. And I guess the timing of the system is going to depend on the input data that we're having. So, with Sentinel-1 radar, it would be a new imagery maybe every 12 days. Though, there's still a lot of work that we need to do on our side to kind of operationalize the processing pipeline from downloading raw imagery to actually processing it in a model and then getting these detected mining areas. But then, we're hoping to have an alert system that different people can sign up for.
So how did you hear about the Artisanal Mining Challenge, and how did you and your team make the decision to enter it?
Yeah, so we heard about it from actually some contacts we have at the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'd been talking to them a little bit about work in Peru, and they mentioned the challenge. And since Christian and I had been already experimenting a bit with this modeling for mining in the Amazon, we started to think if we could actually make a prototype platform for detecting mining in this area. So I guess that started up at the end of January, and it was a pretty long process with different stages to the competition. But we got eventually we got a map prototype working, and we tried it out in some different areas and had been continuing to try and refine the model a little bit.
You ended up partnering with researchers at Wake Forest University and Cincia, who you've already mentioned, for the final round of the challenge?
Yeah, that's right. So when we got to the finalist round, we started talking to the researchers at Wake Forest University and Cincia, and they had some really interesting ideas also related to the things that we wanted to do with detecting mining. And they've also had a long history working on the ground in Madre de Dios,
another department in the southeast of Peru.
So they've been interested in setting up a database of mining areas that's sort of curated is training data that we can put into a model like the one that we're hoping to produce. So by working together with them, we get a really great source of verified training data and a lot of expertise on what mining operations in the area actually look like. And they've even been doing some work with mapping with drones at very high resolution. So I guess all of this can really support, once we have some mining detection output from our model, but we want to verify just how well it's working, where it works well and where we have problems, and see what we can do to try and get better results as we move towards putting out a public map. So we decided to come together for the final stage of the competition.
And of course, you did end up winning a grant from the Artisanal Mining Challenge. What are you going to use the prize money for, and what's the next step for getting Project Inambari operational?
Yeah, so we're going to use the prize money to move from sort of the prototype platform that we set up to an actual live monitoring map that's being continuously updated with new satellite information on mining areas. And so there's a couple areas that we're really going to have to put in a lot of work on in the next year. One thing is this processing pipeline for taking the input of raw satellite imagery that we download and then putting out new mining detections on the map. And then we're also going to use this, these funds to support, what's going to be a pretty complex process of evaluating our results and trying to further improve how we're doing the mining detection model and getting it to work in some different geographic areas. For instance, we see that we need some more work to make this work, make the detection work well where the terrain is a little bit more varied, like in the sort of the Andean foothills, where there are a lot of little streams running through and some varied topography. And then we're also we want to make sure this is being put out on a user interface that has the features that are needed for regulators or others who are looking at the detections. So that's also going to need some development time. And I guess as far as the output, we're also particularly looking that we're doing something that is specifically detecting mining activity and not other types of deforestation. And this is something somewhat unique from other monitoring systems that are in the Amazon, so that are looking less specifically at mining, like Global Forest Watch.
What do you ultimately hope Project Inambari can achieve?
Yeah, so I guess we've thought about three groups of users, principal users for this: government regulators, other environmental organizations that are fighting to protect the Amazon, and then finally, we're also hoping that it can assist some of the local communities that are affected by unregulated mining, and sometimes having a really difficult time to protect lands that they have a legal right to. So we're hoping that ultimately when this is developed, this can have a role not only in supporting government regulation, but also in supporting these communities of local people that are taking action to protect their rights.
As Mongabay prepares for 2021, we're asking readers to invest in journalism that matters. Your support powers our independent reporting, which informs decisions supportive of a sustainable future and provides training and opportunities for 750-plus global journalists. Please support Mongabay today at mongabay.org/donate. That's mongabay.org/donate. And if you enjoy the Mongabay newscast, we ask that you please help spread the word by telling a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep the show growing. So if you have a friend who's particularly interested in the impacts of mining or how we're going about addressing those impacts, this would be a great episode to share with them. And don't forget, you and your friend can subscribe to the Mongabay newscast on the Google Podcasts app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Pandora, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Or you can download our new app for Apple and Android devices. Just search either app store for the Mongabay Newscast app to gain fingertip access to new shows and all our previous episodes. And of course, you can read all of our news and inspiration from Nature's Frontline at mongabay.com. If you prefer to keep up with us on social media, follow us at facebook.com/Mongabay or on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @Mongabay on both those platforms. Thanks as always for listening to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your host, Mike Gorecki, signing off. Talk to you again in the new year.